Well, hey there, everyone. It's Pastor Matt, and I'm here recording, I suppose, a special video. We had some technical difficulties with our streaming and the sound quality in our streaming of the service yesterday. So again, we apologize for that. Thank you for those of you who tried to stick it out and pressed your ear hard close to the screen to try to figure out what was being said. But this is going to be much better, I think, to just re-record the video and then you can listen to it without any sort of interference or feedback or anything like that. But appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. We did have a great service yesterday on the 20th of June, celebrating Father's Day and giving a shout out to our dads. And so dads, we thank you for all that you do and hope that you were celebrated well yesterday. We're going to continue on here in our summer series, Encounters with Jesus. We're looking at the different ways in which Jesus, throughout the Gospels, he has these life-changing moments with people. They are forever changed by their interaction with him. And so we began the series 2 weeks ago. We talked about the miraculous catch of fish, where Peter and James and John were with him, and they went fishing with Jesus. They put their nets out in the water in the middle of the day and caught a record haul of fish. And Peter's response to this Jesus man in the boat with him was to say, "Please depart from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." And we saw that Jesus reassured him and called him to join him in fishing for the souls of men and women. And so at a very basic and foundational level, we were reminded that when someone encounters Jesus, they are convicted of their sin, but they realize that they can find forgiveness of their sin. They realize that Jesus extends that call and that invitation into a personal relationship with him. And then they were also reminded that they're commissioned to go and to tell other people about how amazing Jesus is. And so that's sort of the foundational truth of any encounter. If someone has a real encounter with Jesus, then those things are true. And then last week, if you remember, we were in the Gospel of Mark and we looked at the account of the Gergesene demoniac, this man who was basically left for dead. He was ostracized and outcast by his family and his community. He was living among the tombs in the town, and he was afflicted by unclean spirits, the text told us. He was harming himself. He was crying out day and night and cutting himself with sharp rocks. And Jesus went to this man and waged war against the evil demonic forces that were holding him captive and set him free. And so in that encounter, we were reminded that Jesus truly does have the authority over the demonic. All dark spiritual forces are nothing compared to the authority that he holds. We also saw his heart and his compassionate heart to help the hopeless. And also we were reminded that in our lives, in any situation we find ourselves in today, any influence that might be overtaking us, spiritual or otherwise, Jesus has the power to set us free. And so that was a great time last week. And so this morning, again, as we look at the heart of Jesus, we're going to turn our hearts to worship and really how Jesus, what true worship means to him, shaping our understanding a little bit more of what Jesus sees as worship. And I believe this is important for us because there are times when we sometimes, inadvertently or not, we make worship about ourselves. We become kind of self-centered in our worship experience. We'll say things like, I didn't really get much out of that worship service, or I wasn't really feeling like I was drawn into a place of worship or a sense of worship. And sometimes we look for specific things, specific ways that we can be brought into the zone and we can set the mood, so to speak. But this morning's text will remind us that Jesus simply wants our hearts. He wants my heart. He wants your heart. That's what he cares about most. And so let's open up our Bibles, or if you've got a Bible app on the device you're holding there, please feel free to, if it lets you to listen simultaneously to this and pull up the text, please do that. We're going to be in the Gospel of Luke today, Luke chapter 7. And just as you're turning there to set the stage, this chapter in Luke chapter 7 is really quite the journey that Luke, the author, takes us on as he's seeking to ask and answer a question. Who is this man? Who is this Jesus really? What is he all about? And before we look at our specific passage, the chapter begins, Jesus is in Capernaum and he performs a miracle there. He encounters a Roman centurion and he heals the centurion's servant. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, I suppose. We're going to spend some time in that specific encounter a few weeks down the road in this series. But he's in Capernaum and that takes place. And then after that, he goes to a different town. He travels to a place called Nain. And he basically, while he's there, he disrupts a funeral procession. There's a young man who has died, and the family and friends are carrying the dead body out, and Jesus basically interrupts everything and raises the young man back to life. And just as we talked about last week and even the week before, when there is a profound work of God, a very clear, evidential working of his power in the midst of people, usually the response is one of fear. And that fear sometimes leads to a place of worship. But it says in Luke chapter 7 and verse 16 that great fear seized them all, and then that they are then moved to give glory to God. And then after that time in Nain, Jesus encounters some messengers sent from John the Baptist. And they come to ask him questions on behalf of John, basically asking, are you the one? Are you really the one that John has been speaking about? In other words, John is looking for affirmation and validation of his ministry, of proclaiming that Jesus is the Savior, that he is the one who was prophesied about. And so Jesus tells John's messengers, he says, yes, absolutely. The blind now see, the deaf can hear, the lame can walk, the dead are raised to life. The good news is being preached to both the rich and the poor. And so he then responds, there are some people around him, and he starts speaking to the crowds and says, yes, John the Baptist was right to speak of me. And so that's what sets the stage for this next encounter here in Luke. And so let's open things up now. We're going to start in verse 36 and work our way through the rest of the chapter. I'm going to read starting in verse 36, going to verse 39 to start. And then I'll pray, and then we'll continue to work our way through the passage together. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Reading now, this is the word of God. One of the Pharisees asked him being Jesus, to eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at table. And behold, a woman of the city, who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. Now, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who's touching him, for she is a sinner. We'll stop it there for now. Let's take a moment to pray together. Father, we're thankful for this time. This is kind of a unique and special time where Sunday's already come and gone, and yet here we are in the middle of our day or the middle of our week, and we have the opportunity to open up your word. And Lord, we do believe that you are a God who's to be known and to be experienced, and you set aside specific moments of experience. Sometimes we refer to those as divine appointments. And so we believe, Lord, that even right now, wherever each person is watching from in these moments, that this is a time that you have set aside. It's a time that you have ordained that we might hear from you, that we might be drawn more closely to you and see more of your heart and more of your character. And so, Lord, I pray for each one watching. I pray that you would help them to just hear your voice in these moments. Let us just lay aside any distractions, any other things that might weigh on us in this moment, that might seek to pull us away from this divine appointment, this moment of experiencing you and interacting with the truth of your word. Lord, I pray that you'd help me to have the energy and enthusiasm that I need. I pray that your Spirit would fill me and help me to walk us through this passage here now. We ask that you'd get the glory, Lord. We pray together in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, there are many different labels in our world. You go to the grocery store, you have your shopping list, and you see labels all around you. Different products have these different things. They're in the corner or around the neck of the bottle or on the bottom or back of the box or whatever it is. And different labels serve different purposes. Some act as descriptors. They're kind of listing, the nutritional value, or they'll give you the information that you're looking for, low fat, low sugar, low sodium, glucose-free, lactose-free, gluten-free, all these different labels, right? We look at those and we see them. Other labels serve as promoters. They're kind of the hype man for the product, as it were. It says, new and improved flavor, hey, or tastes great on the grill, or this is the new recipe you're going to want to try in 2021. Sometimes labels serve as warnings for us. Different household products that we buy for cleaning or for other things. They tell us whether what we're buying is combustible or corrosive or poisonous. They give us the heads up to read the little attention or warning label sometimes that says this could be a shock hazard, or this could cause injury, or improper assembly could lead to death. So those are the labels we see all around us. And when it comes to people, whether or not we admit it, we sometimes assign labels. We assign labels to ourselves, and we assign labels to one another. We typecast people based on previous incidents or experiences. But here's the thing about labels. Labels are not the substance itself. The label is not the product. And so when you label someone or you label something, you are assigning a value to something that is either a possibility or a past experience. And the label's really only ever meant to tell you something about the product. It's not the product itself. And so often, when we assign labels, we draw conclusions before we gather all the evidence. And so as we open up this passage here in Luke chapter 7, this is exactly what is taking place here. Jesus has been invited to the home of this Pharisee. His name is Simon. And thinking about the Pharisees for a moment, the Pharisees, they were a group of Jewish people living at the time of Jesus who were incredibly religious. They were incredibly devoted to the studying and the observing and the upholding of the Old Testament laws. They were meticulous in their detailed study. And their belief was that by keeping all the laws and showing other people that they were keeping all the laws, that they would earn the favor of God. And as part of that favor, they would then be revered amongst their peers. They would be celebrated in their community. They would be seen as flagposts, signposts of righteousness. So they saw themselves as blameless. And thinking about the Apostle Paul, when we read later on in the New Testament, he shares a little bit of his experience. He was taught by one of the foremost Pharisees, a man by the name of Gamaliel. And Paul says, in terms of upholding the law, I was blameless. When it comes to my ability to keep God's law, I'm the best. I'm blameless. And so the label given to Pharisees then at this time, as we read in Luke's gospel, they are seen as holy. They're righteous. They are esteemed people. They're super special. And so Jesus is invited to the home of Simon, the super special Pharisee. He's going to join him for a super special meal. And then this woman walks in. This woman finds out about a meal, and she shows up at Simon's place. And verse 37, as we look at the text, it gives her a label as well. It says that she's a woman of the city and that she is a sinner. And I want to clarify something because sometimes when we read through the Gospels, we see parallel accounts or similar accounts, and we get a little bit confused. And so just to clarify who this woman really is, this is not Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. There is actually an incident described in the other three Gospels where Mary anoints Jesus at a place called Bethany, and that actually takes place later on in Jesus' life and ministry. It takes place during Passover week. So this is a different woman. This woman is also not Mary Magdalene. That's sometimes people make that association because if you read on in Luke chapter 8 in the opening verses, it starts talking about Mary Magdalene. But there's no indication given that this is one and the same. This is likely a different woman. She is described as a sinful woman here in Luke chapter 7. Now, think about that. How would you like to be carrying that label? She was a woman of the city, and she was a sinner. Think about labels that would be similar today. You know, hey, here comes scandalous Steve, watch out. Or, well, there goes indecent Irene. Or watch out, everyone, here comes lying Larry. Don't expect anything true to come out of his mouth. Or, oh, shoot, everyone take cover. There's criminal record Kathy. Just steer clear of her. Right? We think, oh, well, it's kind of ridiculous to use those labels. That's not really fair to do that. And it might have just been based on one incident, one moment where it was a lapse in judgment, and it shouldn't be fair for that person to have to be called that the rest of their lives, to carry that around. But that's what's going on here. This woman has this label. She's bearing it. She's wearing it. She's worn it for a while. And the word of her behavior has spread. And yet for her in this moment, she just wants to get to Jesus. In this moment, her heart attitude is one of worship. Just get me to Jesus. Just let me have him. If I can't have anything else in this world, if I can't have luxury or stability or dignity, if my reputation is just going to be dragged through the mud, honestly, what I really need most is Jesus. Just get me to Jesus. I need him. Have you ever been in that place? Ever been in that place where you know really the only thing you need to know in that moment is that God is God, and your simple response is to bow before him in reverence and worship? One of my favorite movies of all time is Rudy. Football movie, inspirational, kind of the stereotypical inspirational sports movie. But I love it, and I cry every time, every single time, never fails. I watched it like a few weeks ago, and at the end, I was sobbing uncontrollably. It's one of the few movies that's ever made me cry, and it gets me still every time. But if you're not familiar with the story of Rudy, it's about a guy who has the lifelong dream of playing football at the University of Notre Dame. And all his life, nobody really gives Rudy a chance. His family, his friends around him, they say, hey, you're too small. You don't have the smarts to get into a university like that. You don't have any athletic ability to play football, let alone college varsity football. And yet Rudy doesn't give up on his dream. And while he's trying to get into the university, he's attending a nearby college in South Bend. It's the College of the Holy Cross. And semester after semester goes by, his grades just aren't quite high enough to receive admission into Notre Dame. And so he has one final semester before he can transfer his credits as a senior. He's got one last chance to do it. And so there's this scene in the movie where it's like the night before he gets his grades back, and he'll find out whether or not he can get into the school. And he's there in the chapel on campus at the college, and he's praying. And one of the fathers who's befriended him, one of the Catholic priests who actually helped him get in the college in the first place, he notices Rudy, and they start talking. And Rudy sort of asks the question, have I done everything I possibly can? Have I prayed enough? Is there something more I can do? And I love the response of Father John. He gives this response. He says, son, in 35 years of religious studies, I've come up with only two hard, incontrovertible facts. There is a God, and I'm not him. There is a God, and I'm not him. I believe that realization is what drives us to a place of worship. When we get to that place where we realize just who God really is, and then we understand who we are in light of who he is, I believe that brings us to that place of understanding, hey, I'm on holy ground here. I need to bow down. I'm encountering the living God. He is holy. And this is exactly what's happening here in Luke. This woman, she is marked as a sinner. She knows it. Everybody knows it. She's broken. And she comes to Jesus with her flask of ointment. She weeps over him. She's wetting his feet with her tears. She's kissing his feet. Just get me to Jesus. He's all I want. He's the only one I need. I don't need to read the room in this moment. I don't care about the room. I don't care about anyone else in the room. Just get me to him. Now, before we read further on here, just look at verse 39 again. Look at the reaction of Simon the Pharisee. It says that he's kind of muttering to himself. He's talking to himself, man, if this Jesus, if he really were a prophet, then he would know what sort of woman this is. He would know what behavior she has, what sins she's committed. In other words, Simon is thinking to himself, Jesus should know the label. Jesus should read the label, and he should react in such a way that this particular label deserves. She's a sinner. She doesn't deserve to get near him like that, to kiss his feet. He shouldn't allow her to be acting this way. She's creating a scene. But how does Jesus respond? How does he respond as this is going on? Well, let's keep reading here. I'm going to read verses 40 to 43 now. And Jesus answering said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, say it, teacher. A certain moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now, which one of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. So in this moment, Jesus can see what's going on in Simon's heart. And so he offers a mini parable here. Here's a little story for you, Simon. You're a sharp guy. You're a Pharisee. You can probably catch on to this. You can figure this one out. So there are two people in debt. They have significant debt. One is a really steep debt, a really deep debt. One, not so bad. One of them owes 500 denarii. And just a reminder that a denarius was about 1 day's worth of wages in those days. And so to think about that, 500 denarii would be about 20 months. So this person is in debt. They owe somebody else basically almost 2 years worth of what they've earned. That's a pretty significant burden. The other person owes 50 denarii, so a couple months' wages worth that they owe. And so what happens in the story? Well, Jesus says the money lender cancels both debts. And not surprisingly, the greater reaction of gratitude, the greater response of love comes from the one who had the greater debt. Simon's able to figure it out. Now, why does Jesus share this story? What's going on in this moment? What's he teaching Simon? What's he teaching the woman? What's he teaching all who are present, who are listening? What's he teaching you and I today as we read this passage? It's this. Jesus doesn't care about labels. Jesus doesn't care about labels. He cares about our hearts. That's what he wants. What matters most to him is our worship. He doesn't need our worship. He has enjoyed endless worship from the beginning of time. Day and night and day, the angels pour forth their praise. So he is not lacking worship, but he wants it. Why does he want it? Because he knows that that's what you and I were created for. That at the core of our being, we have a longing in our hearts to give our worship to him. And so the fullest life that you and I can live is the ultimate fulfillment of what we were created for is to know him, to enjoy him forever, to live a life offered in worship to him. So Jesus is speaking to the heart. He's addressing what worship is meant to be. And so far he's used this illustration to speak, but now he's going to speak specifically to the situation in the room. He's going to talk about what's happening in the moment. So let's pick it up again. I'm going to read verse 44 to 48 now. Then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little." And he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." Do we see the contrast here? Jesus lays it all out for us. Simon is this, self-righteous Pharisee. He's consumed by the outward appearances, making sure that everyone knows, everyone sees just how good he is at being good. It's all about the external appearance. And so even this act of having the prominent teacher, Jesus, coming into his home, that's to be commended. That's a good act, a good, noble act of hospitality. And yet Jesus does a little bit of nitpicking here. He calls it out. He says, "Hey, Simon, you didn't give me any water for my feet." And we might sort of think of that today as a little bit of a silly rebuke. What is that really about? But in the time and the culture, that was an essential element of hospitality. This is really a massive neglect of a guest on Simon's part, because think about it today. This would be like somebody coming to visit you in the middle of the winter and it's snowing outside and they step in the door and you don't even offer to take their coat, right? You just kind of leave them as it is. Not offering water to someone to wash their feet, recognizing that they've been out walking the dirty streets, the smelly streets. Man, that's a massive oversight on Simon's part. That's basically an insult. Jesus goes on to say, "You didn't anoint my head with oil." That's another custom of fellowship and hospitality. And that's what he's doing is he's evoking imagery from the Word of God. We find this in Psalm 23. If you can remember that well-known psalm, David writes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But later on, he goes on to say that you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. And so this is imagery that's used to describe God inviting David to the table, to come to that place of intimacy and fellowship, to enjoy one another. And so Jesus is using this language, drawing from Psalm 23, that Simon the Pharisee, knowing the Word of God, knowing the law, he would know that automatically. He'd immediately make the association. Simon, You're too busy here. You're judging this woman. You're judging what's going on. You're only seeing the label, and yet she is doing what is right in this moment. She is being more hospitable than you. She's provided tears to wash my feet. She's anointed my feet with this ointment. She's giving her very best to me because she is worshiping. And then look again at what Jesus says in verse 47, because this is key for us to understand this passage. It's key for us to understand this encounter, and it's really key for us to understand this moment of worship. He says, I tell you, her sins are forgiven. And in fact, Jesus makes mention that this woman does have many sins, but they're forgiven. It's not about the label, because it's about the heart. Jesus says that this woman loved much. And that's not to say that her love is the cause of the forgiveness. Her love is not the reason that she receives this forgiveness in this moment, but it is the result. Same as it was in the parable. The one who received the cancellation of the greater debt, they had the greater response of love. That's what they were moved to do. Simon is disgusted by this woman being in his presence, let alone Jesus' presence. He's looking at this seemingly pitiful display of remorse, and he's looking at it with contempt and with judgment. But Jesus, you know what he sees? He sees faith. He sees a heart that is longing to simply be with him. And he graciously extends his forgiveness. And what he says in these verses really stirs other people up. I mean, to say that your sins are forgiven, that's going to get a rise out of those who are gathered at Simon's table. So let's finish up the chapter here, verses 49 and 50. It says, Then those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, Who is this, who even forgives sins? He said to the woman, Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This is the question that Luke's asking throughout this chapter. Who is this Jesus? It's a question that our world continues to ask today. Who is he really? Is he worthy of my worship? This woman has decided that yes, in fact, he is. He is the one we need to worship. He's the one I'm going to bow down to in worship. Everyone at the table is asking the question, who even has that authority to forgive sins like that, to say that somebody else can be forgiven? Jesus says, your faith has saved you. She has received forgiveness of her many sins because of her faith, because of her desire to worship Jesus. Just get me to Jesus. That's all that matters. She understands the implications of who he is, and she unashamedly, without a care of anyone else's response, she just gets to him. She comes to him just as she is. Go in peace, Jesus says. Move forward with your life. Don't carry around the label of sinner any longer, because you know what? I don't see that label. I see the label that I have given you. I've just given it to you. You are forgiven. That is the label that you carry. That is who you are because of your faith in me. Les Miserables is a fantastic literary work by the great author of the 19th century, Victor Hugo. It's been adapted into different forms of theater over the years. A famous musical that ran for many years from Andrew Lloyd Webber. When we talked about Joseph, when we did that series in April, I talked a little bit about that musical. But Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical has been excellent. There was a movie, a film production, which came out a few years back and picked up a few Oscars. There have been other film adaptations over the years. But honestly, the one that's impacted me the most was a really old one from the 1930s, starring Frederick March and Charles Laughton. And if you've not seen it, it's black and white, but it's a classic. It's very well done. But if you're not familiar with Les Mis at all, here's the story. It gives the account of a French man, Jean Valjean, and he is thrown into prison he receives a 19-year sentence for stealing a loaf of bread to help his sister and her family. And so Jean is thrown in prison. After he's released from jail, he's stuck with a label. He's carrying around the label of ex-convict. And so he is turned away subsequently from different places, trying to find work, trying to find housing. And then finally, he's taken in by a bishop. One of the towns he's in, the local bishop is willing to let him stay at his place for a while. Well, Jean is still a bit rough around the edges, and one night he decides he's going to escape, and before he does, he steals some of the bishop's silver. He packs it in his bag, and he's about to leave. Well, he gets out the door, and he gets into the town, but then he's caught. He's arrested by some policemen, and they bring him back to the bishop. And in this 1930s edition film adaptation of Les Miserables, it's quite a powerful scene where the bishop essentially commissions John. He first kind of scolds him. He says, I meant to give him the silver, and And he said, I'm disappointed that he forgot to take my precious candlesticks as well. And so the police leave, and there's kind of this awkward scene between the bishop and John, where John just feels remorse and really humbled and not understanding why this bishop would cover for him and even go even further to graciously give him more valuables that can help him in his life journey. But the bishop says to John, "You're a new man now. And remember that life is to give, not to take." Well, as the story goes on, in his newfound freedom, John takes this to heart and he becomes a truly reformed citizen. He becomes a public official. He's the mayor of a town. But despite this, throughout the rest of the story, if you know it, he's pursued by an adversary. There's the policeman Javert, this constable, who is so consumed with the maintenance and upholding of the law, of enforcing the law, the letter of the law, and he goes to great lengths in his pursuit to try to bring Jean Valjean to justice. And I think we can probably see the different parallels here of the different figures, the different characters. There's a person with a past who's been forgiven, they've been redeemed, and they move forward in their new life. There's another person who's graciously removed the old label, forgives them, sends them on their way. And then there's yet another who's obsessed with outward appearances and following and enforcing all the rules. And so to wrap up our time here, just a couple simple questions for us to think about as we go from here. And again, more than anything, my prayer and my hope is that each of these weeks in this series, we will see the heart of Jesus first and foremost. And so it's really heart questions that we ask ourselves in response to the text. And so that's what we do. And God's word really is a mirror that we hold up to see ourselves in it. And when we open it up and come to him with a sense of excitement and expectation, we believe that he's going to do something in our hearts. He's going to speak to us. And so just a couple questions for us to think about. The first one is this: what labels are you carrying or assigning? I'll say that again. What labels are you carrying or assigning? This is what we've been talking about a little bit this morning, about labels. And realistically, many of us today are wearing labels. What might it be for you? Is it a matter of a past experience, something you just really can't shake, that one incident or that one time, or something that failed in your past and you're still dealing with that today? Maybe it's an area of your life that you've really kind of pinpointed and staked your identity on, and that's the label that you want others to see. I want to remind you, the gospel of Jesus it tells us that we don't have to be typecast a certain way. I love the words that Paul used when he wrote to the Colossians. In Colossians chapter 3, he talks about how in Jesus we put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of our Creator. But then he goes on to say that in Christ, there are no labels. There are no titles. There's no Greek or Jew or circumcised or uncircumcised, slave, free, barbarian, Scythian. Those titles don't matter. They disappear in the gospel of Jesus. The labels are removed and we don't have to carry them around. Beyond carrying labels, are you assigning labels? Are you assigning labels to other people? If that's the case, I would implore you in the name of Jesus to throw away the label maker, to throw it away. Simon the Pharisee, he was appalled by the actions of this sinful woman, but he's also appalled by Jesus' response to her. He thought that the woman didn't belong at such a fancy meal in his home with a special audience, and then he thought that Jesus was foolish to allow her to behave and to carry on the way she did. She was making a mess of herself. But Jesus is in the mess. In fact, he thrives in the mess. He is continually at work in the mess. And so when we assign labels, either to ourselves or when we assign labels to other people, what we're doing in that moment is we're not trusting in Jesus. We're not trusting in his character. We're not trusting in his goodness. We're not trusting in his ability to redeem. So the question we need to ask is, what labels do you see around you? And then what labels are you carrying? What labels are you assigning? Second question for us to consider is this: what does your worship of Jesus look like? What does your worship look like? Is it ordered and structured and based on outward appearances, just like Simon? Are you concerned that it has to look a certain way in order to feel a certain way? And don't get me wrong, in saying that, I'm not saying, it's certainly good to have a routine. It's important and it's beneficial, but sometimes we make the routine the object of our worship rather than the one we're supposed to worship himself. Do you come to Jesus just as the woman did? Just realizing that if you can just get to him, if you can just be in his presence, then nothing else is going to matter. Nothing else will compare. The things of this world, the things of this earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and his grace. It doesn't matter what else is going on. It doesn't matter who else is in the room. It's just you and your Lord. You can bow before him and worship in that moment. It's probably fitting, just thinking about this, as we had people in the building for our service yesterday. It was the first time since Palm Sunday that we've been able to have people inside the church for a worship service. And so it's been interesting and I guess sobering and heartbreaking even, just talking to so many of you over this past year, that one of the things you long for the most is being able to worship with other Christians, that element of corporate worship. And this is something that makes sense. It's significantly a profound thing that takes place. There's just something supernatural. It really is a spiritual thing when Christians come together in the name of Jesus. They come together for the expressed intent and the expressed purpose of lifting his name. And so it makes sense. It makes sense that we feel that way. But think about that. In corporate worship, the labels are gone, right? I mean, you don't come to church on a Sunday. You don't show up at a worship service pointing other people out, thinking, okay, that's a millionaire, and that person's an alcoholic, or that person's blue collar, that person's white collar, that person's Osgood or Greeley or Manotick. Like, we don't do that. Why? Because in those moments, we're simply children of God. We are heirs of Christ, and we are standing together. We're standing side by side in unity. As brothers and sisters, we're united in our worship. We're giving our honor and praise to our King, and the labels don't matter. They're gone. The only label that matters is that we're his kids. We're his children. And so my prayer is that as we wrap up our time here, my prayer is that you would have freedom in your worship to express yourself in the ways that you feel inclined to give more of yourself to Jesus. And he cares most about your heart. And how do we know that? Because he has written his love across our hearts as a lasting label. That is the only label that really matters. He's written his love across it. Amen? Amen. Well, God bless you. I'm going to take a moment to pray here, and then I'll say farewell. Father, thank you for your word. It is always such a good time to open it up and to just see more of you. I pray and trust that that's been the case here today. Lord, as we head into this week, as it's now the first day of summer, it's a new season. People are outside more, basking in the beauty of your creation, seeing that all around us as kids and families see the finish line of the school year, and we certainly commend the perseverance for everyone involved with that, teachers and parents and students. Lord, these are good times, and we see increased light at the end of the tunnel. We look forward to July when we'll be able to gather a larger group outside. So look forward to that. But Father, in the here and now, help us to just consider in response to your word, just the labels we sometimes carry, the labels we sometimes assign. It's easy to do. I know I do it, Lord. And that affects just how we see ourselves. It affects how you want us to see ourselves. It affects how we see the world around us. It affects how we see you in your holiness. And it affects, what that means is it affects our worship. So Lord, I pray that we would remember that those of us who are in Christ, the only label that matters is that we're your children. We are redeemed and restored and brought into relationship with you. Father, for anyone watching who maybe they've considered the claims of Jesus but have never really invited him into their lives, I pray that they would have the same heart attitude of this woman, to bow down before him in worship, to know that they can receive the forgiveness of sins, that they can go in peace, that they can walk by faith each and every single day in relationship with you. Father, I pray for anyone who might be watching that they would seek you and find you with all their heart. Lord, thank you for your word, and thank you for this time we've been able to spend together. We love you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, God bless you. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. Again, our apologies that didn't quite come together on Sunday morning and how that may have impacted your worship experience and your day. We're still sort of ironing out some of these kinks as we're bringing our church online and streaming the services, and we just so appreciate your patience with us in that, and your flexibility, and certainly the grace you extend toward us. We don't demand perfection, but we certainly strive for excellence, and every so often some challenges come up, and so we just so appreciate you sticking with us as we do that. So thank you so much. God bless you, and looking forward to seeing you again soon.